Thank you, Pam and Mateus. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen. I hope you were able to catch the Q&A session. If you have any questions during the presentation, please add them to the chat. I am pleased to introduce Mark Halpern. Mark is a certified financial planner, designated with the Trust and Estate Practitioner with STEP, Master Financial Advisor with Philanthropy, and he is the CEO of wealthinsurance.com. Mark and his team provide tax advantage solutions to protect families and their businesses. Today, Mark will describe the strategies he uses to help clients preserve wealth, mitigate tax liabilities, enhance final estate values, and create enduring philanthropic legacies. Several of the strategies shown will illustrate creative financing arrangements available through banks, credit unions, and other specialty lenders. I will pass it over to Mark and his presentation.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's great to be here, and really I'm very honored to have been invited by Pamela Green and the team here at Gowlings. We love having them as a strategic partner, helping and collaborating with clients together. I've been in professional practice for almost 30 years, and I've been trying to convince people that one day they're going to die or get sick, or there's going to be all sorts of ups and downs in the market, and nobody believed me. Suddenly it takes a global plague for people to realize that their mortality is really in question, and as a result, there are a lot of the incompletions they have. Wills, estate freezes, and philanthropy are things that unless you do something about now while the sun is shining, unfortunately we know we can't take care of. Our business is built into three areas. One is estate planning, the second is tax minimization strategies, and the third is philanthropy. Our corporate goal is actually to create $100 million a year of new philanthropy by working with clients and donors of nonprofit organizations and collaborating with allied professionals. And today I'm going to share with you some of the things that we're doing, and you as the gatekeepers who are involved so much with your clients' wealth will hopefully be people who can actually help and aid in creating some great charity and helping clients and families very much. And of course, whatever we discuss today, the first and foremost is speak to your professional advisors. It's not a do-it-yourself. Unfortunately, we've seen tragedies and terrible things that have happened in that case. A lot has changed in the last 20 years. In 2000, we had Steve Jobs, Bob Hope, and Johnny Cash. 20 years later, no Jobs, no Hope, and no Cash. But it's not all that bad. As a matter of fact, the CRA is looking at refining their tax treatment and actually having a new simplified tax form that's only going to have one question for all Canadians. How much did you make? Send it in. Now, of course, we joke around about that, but there's no question that today's reality is really very different. First of all, taxes are going to be going up. We can't keep printing out money. There's going to have to be a tally that has to come back to the coffers of the government. And you're going to see capital gains taxes increase. You'll see perhaps an inheritance tax, a wealth tax, perhaps tax on principal residences. One thing's for sure, we know that we have to do some planning around that. In the charitable sector, donations are down somewhere between $9 and $14 billion. And donors are getting older, so they really need to look at creating legacies for themselves. We're also in a misinformation age. People are looking for information online, and it's really not customized or bespoke for their particular needs. We've all heard the adage, Freedom 55. It's very aspirational. Freedom 55 today is when your youngest child is 55. Now, that's no joke. Think of it, our kids are getting out of school, they're saddled with debt, they have to find jobs, COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID, they're trying to find real estate in the city. It's very difficult. We're actually going to be helping them far longer. The good news is families are seeking meaning in their lives. There's really a desire for people to make a difference and to go from success to significance. And the beautiful part is that most are unaware of the tax benefits that can happen by converting taxes into charity, and I'd like to show some of those with you. Now, I said my start was 30 years ago, but my real start was in 1974, and that's when my father, of blessed memory, died of a massive heart attack at the age of 50. I was 11, I was the youngest of four boys, and my mother, who was 48 at the time, had to go back to work to support our family. It was very hard for us because my father was a busy engineer and there was no will, very little savings, and unfortunately there was no life insurance. Fast forward, I work with some of the most successful business owners, entrepreneurs, and affluent families, and you would think they'd have everything organized, but the reality is 80% of the time it's not true. They're so busy looking after everything and everyone else that they really haven't taken care of some of the things that we're going to talk about today. And it's very important that they look that their financial architecture they started with and the furniture at that time looks very different from their financial architecture today. The question is, does the furniture still align? And that's why it's really important that philanthropy is really part of a comprehensive 30,000 foot level of a discussion first. These are just some of the ideas that we'll look at with each of our clients if they want to go through that process. But clearly, we always end up talking about strategic philanthropy. Now, for most of our clients, they've passed this stage in life where they've accumulated a lot of assets. At some point in time, they're going to want to access those assets, but most of our clients really are going to be worth more when they die than what they're worth today, which means that they are really the custodian or the trustee for the next generation. But what they're unaware of is that they're partnering with Revenue Canada on that money. So it's important to go from investing to planning to be able to say, look at, can we take some of that never spend money and use it to preserve the estate 100% for the family, or look at charity? And it's not unusual for me to meet somebody who's worth $50 million, and when we've done the work, we tell them they're only worth $35 million. That seems to get their attention. And why is that? Because we have a lot of taxes payable in Canada. Here's just a little basket of some things that most people are not aware of. And when you look at just taxes here in Ontario, it's very high. Registered assets at 54%. Any gains in investment real estate or your private equity in your business or appreciated securities, 27% of the gains. Corporate holdings, getting it out, taxable dividends, passive income tax, probate. All in all, it's a big number. So the way that we engage clients in terms of this philanthropic conversation is that every one of us has three possible beneficiaries to our estate. You have family, you have the government, and you have charity. And each of us can only pick two. Which two would you pick? Most people would say, I'd like to give it to my family and charity. So with proper planning, you could be remembered for giving a big check to charities that you're passionate about, as opposed to writing a big check to the tax department. And it really starts with a passion that you might have for particular charities, but then it really comes down to tax. There's actually advantages to be a charitable giver. And at a very high level, giving is savings. For every $2 that you give to charity in personal dollars, you save $1 of tax. And corporately, you can actually save $2 for every $2 you give to tax. And really, all contributions or all charitable donations are not the same. This is just an example here of somebody who wants to give $1 million to charity. And we've looked at them giving cash or giving public shares with a zero cost base. So think of some cannabis stock, or using flow-through shares when they're available, or using life insurance. And you can see that the cost as a percentage can go from 49%, almost 50% of a cost, to as low as 12%. So I think it's really important that people look at different strategies to help maximize their giving and minimize tax. One of the easiest ways to give, again, is to incorporate a gift in a will, also known as a bequest. Perhaps change your will and leave a percentage or a dollar amount to a specific charity. Or if you don't want to go to that trouble, perhaps if you have registered money, notify your financial institution to get a multiple beneficiary form and make a certain percentage or dollar amount go to charity. And why is that? Because most people have a lot of money sitting in RSPs and RIFs. And the accountants always say, take out the minimum. So let's say you're taking out 5%, but you're making 8%. So it's really a deferred tax liability. And at death, unless you have a spouse to roll everything over to on a tax-free basis, everything will be taxed at 54%. That means that the government discriminates against singles, divorcees, and widows. So a $2 million RIF, which is not unusual, would only be worth $920,000 to heirs. So it would make a lot of sense to look at this and see ways that you could actually preserve all of that money for your family and for charity. Another thing that's very popular, especially at this time of year, is most people give cash or credit cards or checks to charity. But what they're unaware is the fact that since 1995, the government has introduced 25 different pieces of legislation to make it easier for us to give charity or money to charity. And one of those is by donating appreciated marketable securities, mutual funds, stocks, ETFs, segregated funds. Here's an example of somebody who would normally give $50,000 of cash. They'd have to make $100 to give $50 and get a charitable receipt to save them $25. Instead, this person has $50,000 in marketable securities with a cost base of $10,000, so there's a gain of $40,000. If he sold that stock, he'd have to pay $10,800 of capital gains taxes. But by donating all of those shares, there's no capital gains tax. They get a full charitable receipt for $50,000, which saves them $25,000 of tax. And this is a great end-of-year strategy. If you know you're going to have a tax bill come April, why not look at your appreciated securities, donate it, and turn your taxes into charity? What a great win-win-win for everybody. We don't have a lot of tax shelters left in Canada. These are really the final four. You have your principal residence. When it gains, you don't pay taxes on that for now. You have TFSAs, but there's small amounts that you can put into them. Lottery winnings in Canada are not taxable. In the United States, they are. And the last one is life insurance. It's also one of the final four. That means everything else that you invest with, the government has their hand out and wants anywhere between 27 and 60% of what you've earned on it. These four, there's nobody there asking for money. So it would make sense for us to look at ways to help us create transformational gifts and minimize taxes. One of those is people, your clients, might have old life insurance policies around that they took out years ago, and they really wouldn't move the dial on their estate planning right now. So for instance, I have somebody who was introduced to that had a $300,000 insurance policy, and they donated it to a university. Because that policy is very valuable, because this person has now become uninsurable, he received a $175,000 charitable receipt, and the university is now paying the premiums going forward for that gift of $300,000. So he saved a whole bunch of tax. They have a $300,000 giver going forward, and they recognize both sides of it. If this donor had wanted to continue to pay premiums, and the premiums would be considered charitable donations, and he would get a receipt for that. Or consider getting a new policy. If you know your clients have a tax bill of $10 million, and that means they'd have to pay, the estate would have to pay that $10 million, wouldn't it make more sense to look at maybe getting a $20 million insurance policy for pennies on the dollars, donating that to charity and eliminating their tax bill for pennies on the dollars, and being remembered for being a philanthropist? Or something very simple is just change the beneficiary on your current insurance and add a certain percentage or a dollar amount to charity, in which case that would be a wonderful way to save taxes and help lots of charities. If you don't want to change at all, and you just want to continue investing, there are ways to create money just by taking the taxes that you're spending right now and instead creating larger dollars for your family. On this diagram, you can see on the left-hand side, this is somebody who would take $100,000 of personal money every year for 15 years. So they put out of pocket $1.5 million, and they're earning 4% on it. 30 years later, it would only be worth $1.5 million. So this is corporate money, not personal. So you notice what they put into the investment after 30 years is pretty much the same, because there are taxes along the way. On the right-hand side is instead using that $100,000 and using a tax-exempt insurance solution, which would shelter that $100,000 every year. So really, at the end of the day, after you're 30, you've created $4 million with the same dollars. So there's an increase of over $2 million, which is nice money that's available to either give to your family or use for charitable donations. But again, it requires somebody to take a look at this and see how it fits into your planning. There are three ways to fund these types of arrangements using insurance. One is through cash flow, paying for it out of your cash flow every year. Or second is reallocating taxable assets. We all have pie charts of our investments, bonds, stocks, real estate, moving taxable money to this tax-exempt bucket. Or using financing arrangements. And this is where the financial institutions have entire divisions that work on specialized lending for tax-exempt cash value life insurance with something called an immediate financing arrangement. And that just allows you to get your insurance in place, put money into it, use the policy as collateral to borrow back the money and reinvest it in your asset, in the investment you like. And because you're borrowing to invest, you get to deduct the interest, and now you're just servicing a loan, and you have this insurance in place for either family, wealth preservation, or for charitable giving. Here's something that we feel is very useful for our clients. This was a 70-year-old couple that had a $5 million estate tax. They had about $30 million invested in blue chip stocks, and they like blue chip stocks. what we did was we used some of that portfolio and we acquired a $10 million joint last to die insurance policy with a premium of $500,000 a year. So they would put $500,000 in the policy, use leverage to borrow the $500,000 to put back into their portfolio. Now they're deducting the interest and just servicing a loan. The insurance grows to $15 million by life expectancy. It pays back the bank at $5 million. $10 million goes to their charitable foundation, which creates a charitable receipt for $10 million and eliminates their $5 million tax bill. And they still had use of their money. What a nice idea for somebody, especially if you have a business owner that knows they're going to have a very large tax on their estate. It's a great way, if they're philanthropic, to save a lot of money. One of the biggest secrets that we find is that people don't know is that life insurance can also be owned and paid for, and the beneficiary can be a private foundation or their own donor advised fund. And there's really, I would suggest 99% of the people don't know about this. A lot of advisors don't realize this as well. So really, if somebody does have a foundation or a donor advised fund, there's a great way for them to create transformational charity and also save a lot of taxes. We'll just go through some other planning strategies here. We've talked about foundations, where you can have a private foundation or set up a donor advised fund, either through a bank or through a community foundation like the Toronto Foundation, Oakville Foundation, Jewish Foundation. You should really look into those. You could use flow-throughs, a whole list, but we're just going to cover a couple just because of the time that we have today. And this is something that we created back in 2017, and that is once you turn 65 in Canada, you are entitled to start receiving CPP. And what happens, it works out to a couple, 65-year-old couple will receive about $26,000 a year. Most people don't need that money, so they're taxed on it, they reinvest it, and they're taxed again. We came up with an idea, how can we use government benefits to create charity? So they can take that $26,000 and buy about a $1.5 million life insurance policy. If the policy is owned by a charity or by their foundation, the CPP is considered a charitable donation. So now they don't pay any taxes on CPP, but they now have a $1.4 million gift for charity. Alternatively, they could pay the tax on the CPP, get the $1.4 million policy, and make a charity the beneficiary of that, in which case their estate would save about $700,000 of taxes. Or the last way is take the CPP, get the $1.4 million policy, make your children the beneficiary of that, and donate your registered money that would have been taxed at 54%. Your family gets 54% more money, or about 50% more money than they would have had it all been taxed, and you've created a wonderful gift for charity. You might also want to look at your CPP and use it as a possible pension plan for your grandchildren, something that you can be remembered for going forward. This was another concept called the gift maximizer, where we had a 43-year-old philanthropist. She wanted to leave a large legacy gift, but she also wanted to create money while she was alive for charity. So what we did was we created a $2.7 million gift that really was made up of two portions. There's a $1.5 million legacy gift when she dies, but during her lifetime, $1.2 million of tax-free dividends would be paid out to the charity, on average about $25,000 a year. Her net cost was about $330,000. Had she used appreciated securities where there would be no capital gains taxes, we could have reduced that cost to probably somewhere around $200,000. Imagine all of that just for $200,000, and again, finding ways to help causes that you care about. I'm just going to go through a case study right now. This is something that's really appropriate for any clients who have done an estate freeze where they've frozen their common shares and they've passed them along to family either directly or through a trust, and now they're sitting on preferred shares where there'll be a tax liability. This is two brothers we had met. They sold their business for about $150 million, and they set up holding companies and estate freezes, and they had some redundant insurance that they wanted to know if there was something they could do for charity. So this is a very high level. This was a 61-year-old with $7.5 million of life insurance. The annual premium is $720,000 a year. It sounds like a big number, I know that. But they get a charitable receipt for that number if the policy is owned by a charity. So they have paid out $7.2 million, but their net cost was only about $3.6 million, and they create a death benefit charitable donation of $14 million for a cost of $3.5 million. What a great way to not only save taxes during the year, but also to create a wonderful philanthropic legacy for your family. A second alternative is no. You could pay those premiums throughout the next 10 years and not get a charitable receipt on that, but leave the $14 million to charity. That would generate a charitable receipt of over $7 million, so that, or a $14 million receipt that would save $7 million of taxes in the estate, and the present value cost of that would only be about $3 million to leave a $14 million gift. But when it comes to donation of private company shares, this is where the magic is. They did a freeze. They have capital gains on those free shares of about $28 million. There's a tax on those of about $7.6 million. That was the situation when we started. Instead, what we did was we donated those private company shares, and we created a charitable donation in order to redeem those shares. So at the end of the day, we create $14 million of charity. We've reduced their tax from $7.6 million to $445,000, so a 70% reduction in taxes. And we also created a tax-free dividend that G2, Generation 2 and Generation 3 can take out of the company on a tax-free basis. Again, just by moving the shells around, but that's all part of estate planning and final estate planning, and somebody who has philanthropic aspirations. So these are definitely things we shouldn't ignore. On the funding of that particular case, they could have set it up on a sinking fund that would have, at the end of the day, cost them about $6.5 million. But again, using financing, an immediate financing arrangement, we could actually set that up for a cost of less than $2 million. So all of that for $2 million to leave a $14 million donation, reduce your tax from $7 million to $450,000, and be able to create a $6 million tax-free withdrawal from the company. That's fantastic. We're really excited, and those are things to be on the lookout for. I've seen 4 types of givers in my experience so far. There are some people who give, they want to remain completely anonymous, don't put my name anywhere. There are others who give because they want to set an example, and hopefully other people will want to do what they do. The third does it because they want to be remembered. They want their name on a building. They want their name in some way to be sort of live on in mortality. And the last one wants to give because giving raises the profile of an individual and a business. Let's face it, people like to do business with businesses that are philanthropic. I'll give you an example of one individual, 27-year-old real estate developer who's really getting a start, and he wanted to meet other very, very successful and wealthy people. What we did was we set up a $1 million donation by him to Sick Kids Hospital at a cost to him of about $5,500 a year over 10 years. So that would be $55,000 over 10 years, and he's recognized today as giving $1 million to Sick Kids, gets on the J.P. Bicknell wall, and now he gets invited to all of the major donor events where people have actually written checks for $100,000 a year, and he gets to associate with those people all in a very cost-effective way of using an insurance policy. So those are the types of things, if you're trying to raise your profile, either personally or in business, it's a great thing to consider. I ask everybody who's listening, how many people know the names of their grandparents? I would suggest most of us do. But how many of us know the names of our great-grandparents? Far fewer. This is actually a picture of my great-grandparents in 1934 in Poland before the Holocaust, Aaron and Liba Gross of blessed memory. Imagine if on January the 1st you received an envelope in the mail and inside there was a check for $10,000 from your great-grandfather. Do you think you'd remember their name? I'm sure you would. So there are ways for us with planning to be able to be leaving a legacy or being remembered, and that's something that's really important, not just for our children, but more importantly for our grandchildren. They say that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. That's when the weather conditions are perfect. But when there's a wind, the apple is far from the tree, and when there's a hurricane like there is today, the apple doesn't even know it came from a tree. We're living in very challenging times, and there's no question that there are very few things that allow us to pass along those legacies and those values to our children and to our grandchildren. One way is certainly through religion, another is through being philanthropic as well. So I think it's really incumbent on all of us that we should look at ways to incorporate philanthropy into our business and into our estate plans as well. Next steps, consider your own family legacy. Now's the time. There's never been a better time to do it. They say you should do it while the sun is shining. Well, we've seen what we've gone through with COVID. This is really the time to have that discussion. Please watch my TED Talk. Google Mark Halpern, Idea City. I did a TED Talk last year called The New Philanthropy. And contact your advisor. Have the discussion. Contact Gowlings or call us, and we'd be very happy to look at your sort of situation. Finally, we have a number of one-pagers and tax letter digests that we've been writing for since 2011. Love to share that with you too if you reach out to us. But the one thing you shouldn't do is don't ignore it. There's too much on the line. I'm going to just leave this last idea when it comes to leaving a legacy. We have, I think, about 300 people who have registered for this program. You know, consider your own gift. Here's an example of giving away $1 million of life insurance and the after-tax cost payable over 10 years. It could actually be even less expensive if you do something on a joint last to die basis or a different type of structure. But imagine if you're 40 years old, for $100,000, which saves you taxes today, you could be remembered for giving $1 million. And if we could have 300 people on this call, on this webinar, or in this meeting, go ahead and do a gift like that. Imagine creating $300 million of money for charities and helping our families and saving taxes at the same time. So I just want to thank everybody for listening. I hope this was informative. Please reach out to us at wealthinsurance.com. We'd love to collaborate, and let's work together to do a lot of good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for that very thought-provoking presentation. We all want to maximize our wealth for the next generation and leave a legacy. You've given us a roadmap to do both through philanthropic giving. Mark and his team, as well as those of us at Gowlings Private Client Services, would be pleased to speak with any of you or your clients about how to make this happen. I hope you can join us for our Q&A breakout session at 4:30. Now back to our hosts.